Hello, my dear ladies and gentlemen. When I was young, I wasn't interested in what most kids were. Sports didn't matter much. What fascinated me was logic, how systems worked, how rules could be built and then broken, and most of all, how machines could be made to think. I still remember the first time I saw a computer. It didn't have a screen, and it certainly didn't look like anything that belonged in someone's home. But it was a doorway, and once I walked through it, there was no going back. When I think about what really sets the course for the future, it's not just education or access or even opportunity, it's curiosity, that quiet but persistent urge to understand how something works, to take it apart mentally, to see if it can be done better, faster, smarter. For me, that started early. There was always something fascinating about problems, not just solving them, but understanding why they existed in the first place. Whether it was a math puzzle, a logic game, or a strange new machine with blinking lights and mysterious sounds, I wanted to understand the rules behind it. That drive to know, to dissect, to improve wasn't something I chose. It felt like something I had to follow. Back then, computers weren't everywhere. In fact, they were practically nowhere. The idea that an average person, especially a kid, would even touch one seemed outlandish. But that only made the interest stronger, the mystery made it magnetic. There was no internet, no tutorials, no YouTube videos to walk you through things. If you wanted to learn something, you had to hunt it down. You had to read manuals that were written like ancient scrolls, dense with technical language and assumptions that you already knew the basics, except you didn't. So you had to figure out those basics on your own, piece by piece. I remember the first time I got access to a real computer. It wasn't sleek. It didn't have a screen. It was massive, noisy, and terrifying in a way. But it was also a blank canvas. You couldn't do anything on it unless you told it exactly what to do. And if you got the instructions wrong, it wouldn't just ignore you. It would crash. It didn't care about effort or intention, only logic mattered, and that was incredibly motivating. It was a challenge that demanded precision, patience, and creative thinking. And when it finally worked, when you wrote a few lines of code and saw the machine respond, doing exactly what you asked, it felt like magic, but better than magic because you earned it. You made the magic happen. That's the thing about curiosity. It doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't care how hard something is. It just keeps pulling you forward. Every time I learned something new, it unlocked another question. How does memory allocation work? What's the fastest way to sort a list of numbers? Can you build a game out of nothing but code? Can you make that code run faster? What if you used a different algorithm entirely? There was no end to it, and I didn't want there to be. Curiosity never tells you you're done. It says, "What's next?" There were adults who thought it was strange to be so obsessed with this stuff. I remember staying up late, reading programming books that were older than I was, or spending hours trying to fix a bug that only showed up under weird conditions. It didn't feel like work. It felt like a puzzle I had to solve. That obsession, because that's really what it was, didn't come from ambition or pressure. It came from the thrill of solving something that seemed unsolvable. From the feeling that this strange, rigid machine could actually become an extension of my ideas, if I just learned how to speak its language well enough, and eventually that language started to make sense. You begin to see patterns. You understand not just how to write code, but how to structure it. You start thinking in logic trees and decision branches. You don't just use computers. You think like them, and that opens up everything. That's when the real ideas start to form. That's when you start thinking, this shouldn't just be a hobby. This could be something more. Looking back, it's easy to connect the dots, to say that curiosity led to skill, skill led to opportunity, and opportunity led to innovation. But it didn't feel like a plan. It felt like chasing one interesting idea after another. It felt like being pulled down a rabbit hole where each answer only led to a better question. And honestly, that's still true. The best work doesn't start with answers, it starts with wonder. It starts with the kind of curiosity that doesn't need a reason, the kind that whispers, just keep going. You're about to find something incredible. Opportunity doesn't always show up with a sign on it. Sometimes it's just a small ripple, something that looks insignificant to most people but feels monumental to the few who are paying close attention. That's exactly what happened with the microcomputer. It wasn't obvious. In fact, to a lot of people, it looked like a toy. But when you're obsessed with solving problems and building systems, you learn to notice the signs early. You feel that shift before everyone else does, and when that happens, you don't wait. You act. When the Altair 8800 came out, it didn't look like the future. It didn't even look like a finished product. No screen, no keyboard. It was a metal box with switches on the front and lights that blinked. But it was programmable. It ran on an Intel 8080 chip, and that was enough to know something big had changed. It wasn't just that the machine existed. It was that it was affordable, relatively speaking, and that meant it could get into the hands of people outside of research labs and corporations. For the first time, a computer could live in someone's house, not just in a lab or behind glass in a museum of technology. That shift in accessibility, that's what changed everything, and the moment it became clear, it lit a fire. Because once you realize that computing power is about to go mainstream, the next question is simple. What are all those people going to do with these machines? A computer without software is like a car without fuel. That's where the opportunity lived, not in the hardware, in the code. If people were going to own computers, they were going to need ways to interact with them. Tools, languages, games, applications, and someone had to build that. We didn't wait for someone else to do it. That wasn't the kind of environment we were in. There was no roadmap, no instruction manual on how to start a software company for microcomputers. But there was a phone number in the back of a magazine, a contact at a company that had just released a computer with no software to speak of. And there was an idea, write a version of BASIC that could run on the Altair. That was the moment to move, not after the market developed, not after the demand was clear, right then. It's hard to describe just how crazy that sounded at the time. There were no venture capitalists lined up. No team of developers. No guarantee the code would even run when it got to the machine. But that didn't matter. What mattered was being first, not just to market, but to understand what the market could be. We wrote the code on paper before we even had access to the machine. We tested it in theory. We ran simulations in our heads, and when the time came to deliver, it worked. That first successful run, that moment when the Altair blinked to life under our control, it wasn't just a technical win. It was a proof of concept for everything that would come after. You don't get many moments like that in life. Moments when something is just beginning, and you get to help shape what it becomes. That's the essence of seizing an opportunity, not waiting until it's safe or proven, but recognizing the potential early and betting everything on it. There was no fallback plan, just conviction. Just a belief that the microcomputer was not a passing trend, but the beginning of something that would transform the way people live, work, and think. What most people missed at the time was how exponential that transformation would be. They saw a gadget. We saw a platform, a way to democratize technology, to give individuals power that once belonged only to large organizations. And that's a huge shift, not just in tools, but in mindset. Once you give people access to computing, you give them the ability to build, to solve, to create. And when enough people have that power, everything changes: education, business, communication, science. So that first program wasn't just about making a computer run. It was about lighting a fuse, about saying, this is real, this is possible, and this is just the beginning. Seizing that moment wasn't about being lucky. It was about being ready when the door opened. It was about seeing a blinking box and realizing it could be the foundation of a new world. Because that's the thing about history. It doesn't always feel historic in the moment. Sometimes it feels like staying up all night debugging, or mailing out tapes from a tiny office, or making one more phone call. But if you know where it's headed, if you can see what's coming just over the horizon, you act. And you act fast. From the beginning, it was never just about writing lines of code. That part mattered, of course. It had to work, it had to be fast, and it had to solve real problems, but that was just the surface. Underneath it all was a deeper question. What are we really trying to do here? Are we just building programs, or are we trying to shift the way people engage with information, with each other, with the world? That question kept coming back, louder each time, and the answer always pointed to the same truth. This was a mission much bigger than software. In those early days, it was easy to get caught up in the technical side. You'd spend hours trying to make something compile, trying to shrink memory usage by a few kilobytes, trying to make a program load faster or crash less often. But behind that grind was the reason why it mattered. If people were going to have computers in their homes, they needed more than tools. They needed a bridge. They needed something that made the complexity invisible and the power accessible. That vision of computing not as a niche hobby, but as something truly personal and universal, guided every decision. It shaped the kinds of software that were written, the platforms that were built, the partnerships that were formed. It wasn't enough to just be technically impressive. The goal was to make something useful, something intuitive, something that anyone, not just engineers or scientists, could sit down and use to get meaningful work done. That was the real revolution, when computers stopped being the domain of experts and started becoming extensions of human intention. It was never about having the most features or the most clever design. It was about impact. Could a student write their first essay? Could a teacher organize a lesson plan? Could a small business manage its inventory? Every improvement, every update was a step toward making that possible. And once you start thinking that way, you begin to see software not as a product, but as a platform for empowerment. You start to see it as a way to lift people up. There's something powerful that happens when you give someone the tools to build, to analyze, to express. You start to remove the limitations they've been living with, limitations of time, of geography, of opportunity. That's when it becomes clear that you're not just delivering applications, you're delivering possibility. A spreadsheet program isn't just about numbers. It's about helping a person run a business, feed a family, make smarter decisions. A word processor isn't just about typing. It's about letting someone tell their story. Every line of code is a kind of invitation. Here, take this and use it to do something you couldn't do yesterday. As the technology evolved, the mission stayed the same. Lower the barrier to entry and raise the ceiling of what's possible. The more intuitive the interface, the more invisible the complexity, the more people can participate in the future. And it's not just about access to tools. It's about access to opportunity. That's what made the mission bigger than any single product or version or release. It was never about winning the tech race. It was about giving people the chance to run their own races, faster, smarter, and on their own terms. That idea of computing as a force for democratization was, and still is, the real engine behind it all. If you make powerful tools only for the few, the world stays the same. But if you make them for the many, you change everything. That belief drove every late night, every impossible deadline, every time a system had to be rethought or rewritten. Because it was never just about solving today's problems. It was about preparing people to solve tomorrow's. Even as things scaled, even as the company grew and the market changed, that core idea remained the compass. Software is just the medium. The real message is what it enables people to do. That's what makes it worth the effort. That's what makes it a mission, not just a business. Because when you help someone use technology to take control of their life, to learn, to build, to grow, you're not just writing code. You're helping write the future, and that's the goal. Not just to create things that work, but to create things that matter. Not just to build better software, but to build a better world through it. When you're trying to build something that hasn't been done before, you quickly learn that talent isn't enough, vision isn't enough. Even relentless effort isn't enough. What really makes the difference, the thing that takes an idea and turns it into something lasting, is partnership. Not in the surface level sense of working together, but a deeper, more demanding kind of alignment. A shared obsession, a willingness to challenge each other without ego, a belief that the mission is bigger than either person alone. That's what turns sparks into fire. From the very beginning, it was clear that trying to go it alone wouldn't work. The problems were too complex, the stakes too high. It takes more than one perspective to find the best solution. You need someone who sees what you don't, someone who balances your strengths, exposes your blind spots, and forces you to justify your thinking. That kind of relationship isn't always easy, but it's essential. It starts with trust, and not the kind you find overnight. It's built over long hours, difficult decisions, and moments where everything could go wrong. It's built when one person is deep in code while the other is talking to suppliers or writing contracts. It's built when both people are equally committed, equally all in, and when disagreements are about the work, not the ego. That kind of trust lets you move faster. It lets you take bigger risks because you know someone's watching your blind side. There were moments in those early years when things could have fallen apart. The pressure was intense. Deadlines didn't move. Products had to ship. Customers had to be convinced. Investors had to be answered. In those moments, having the right partner wasn't just helpful. It was the only thing keeping everything on track. When one person was burned out, the other picked up the slack. When one got too locked into a technical problem, the other would reframe it from the business side. That back and forth wasn't a luxury. It was the engine, and it wasn't just about dividing the work. It was about multiplying the thinking. Some of the biggest breakthroughs came from conversations that started as arguments, not personal ones, but technical ones, strategic ones. Is this the right market? Is that code good enough? Are we building for now or building for the future? That kind of friction, when it's healthy, sharpens ideas. It keeps things from settling into easy answers. It raises the standard. What made the partnership work wasn't similarity. It was complement, where one person was detail-focused, the other was vision-driven, where one could see the big picture, the other could spot the bug buried 10 layers deep. One could read a contract and know exactly where the risk was. The other could walk through code and know where it would break. That diversity of skill combined with a unity of purpose is rare. And when you find it, you protect it. You don't let it get diluted by distractions or politics. You keep the mission at the center. It also helps when both people are willing to do the unglamorous work. There were late nights when we weren't writing code or making deals. We were just moving furniture, setting up systems, rewriting documentation, answering customer calls ourselves. Nobody thought they were above the grind. That set the tone. It created a culture where execution mattered as much as ideas. Over time, as the company grew, that foundation held everything up. New people came in, new roles were created, but the DNA of the partner, sheep intense focus, high standards, mutual respect, was embedded in everything. You can scale teams, you can scale products, but you can't scale trust. That has to be built one har, durned moment at a time. Looking back, the empire wasn't built through luck or sheer brilliance. It was built on decisions made in quiet rooms, with two people pushing each other to do better, to think harder, to never settle. It was built on late night strategy sessions, on rewriting plans when the market shifted, on staying grounded even when the company started to take off. That kind of partnership doesn't just shape the company. It shapes you. It forces you to grow in ways you wouldn't have on your own. It teaches you to listen, to compromise without losing conviction, to trust another person with your vision. And in the end, it teaches you that while ideas can spark a revolution, it's partnership that sustains it. Because when you build something that lasts, you rarely build it alone. At some point, passion alone isn't enough. It gets you started, no question. It drives the all-nighters, the obsession over getting every detail right, the hunger to keep learning when there's no reward in sight. But if you want to make real impact, if you want your ideas to reach people and actually change the way they live and work, you have to turn that passion into something structured. You have to build around it. Shape it, scale it. That's when it stops being just a project and starts becoming a business. It's not a clean or easy transition. Passion is chaotic by nature. It doesn't follow a schedule or care about margins. It wants to go deeper into the problem, to perfect the thing that no one even notices. That's a strength, but it can also be a trap. You can build the most elegant system in the world and still fail if no one uses it. You can solve a problem beautifully, but if you don't solve the right problem or communicate why it matters, then all that brilliance never leaves the garage. That's the shift that has to happen. You have to start thinking beyond the technology itself. Who's the customer? What are they trying to accomplish? What's going to make them choose your product over everything else? What's the business model? Passion gives you the fuel, but those questions give you the map. They force you to translate your vision into something usable, something marketable, something sustainable. In the beginning, that translation is hard. It means saying no to features you're excited about because they confuse users. It means rewriting code not because it's broken, but because it's too slow to demo well. It means pricing something based not on how hard it was to build, but on what someone's willing to pay for it. That's the business side. It's not glamorous, but it matters just as much as the invention. There's a myth that business decisions kill creativity. That's not true. They focus it. Constraints don't weaken passion. They refine it. They force you to prioritize. When resources are limited, when time is short, you start asking better questions. You stop chasing perfection and start building for purpose. And sometimes that's when your best ideas come, when you're backed into a corner, trying to meet a deadline, and suddenly a simpler, more powerful solution emerges. Of course, building a business also means building a team. And that's where things get even more real, because now it's not just about what you can do, it's about what you can lead, what you can delegate, what you can communicate clearly enough that someone else can pick it up and run with it. That takes a different kind of discipline. You go from being the person who does everything to the person who builds the system that allows others to do great work. That shift is humbling, but it's also how you grow. One of the most rewarding moments is watching someone take an idea you had and improve it, build on it, challenge it, take it somewhere unexpected. That's when you know the passion has spread. It's not just yours anymore. It's part of the company culture. It's embedded in how people think, how they solve problems, how they treat customers. That's the real engine of a business, not just the product, but the people behind it and the values they share. Still, no matter how much the company grows, the passion has to stay at the center. It has to drive the choices, even the hard ones. Do you cut a product that isn't working even though you love it? Do you push back against a market trend that goes against your principles? Do you keep investing in innovation when the safe move is to just maintain what you've built? The answers to those questions define the difference between a company that lasts and one that just cashes in. Turning passion into a business isn't about compromising your ideals. It's about amplifying them. It's about finding the structure that lets your ideas scale without losing their soul. And if you do it right, the thing you were once doing just for fun, the problem you couldn't stop thinking about, the code you were writing at 2 a.m. becomes something that reaches millions of people. It becomes something that changes how they work, how they learn, how they create. That's when you realize it was never just about the business. It was about the impact, and that's when the passion really pays off. Looking back, the origin story of Microsoft isn't just about technology. It's about what happens when relentless curiosity meets the right moment in history. It's about taking risks when everyone else plays it safe. It's about dreaming big, and then doing the hard, often boring work of turning that dream into reality. The code, the strategy, the products, all of that matters. But more than anything, it's the belief that you can build the future with your own hands. That belief is where it started, and that belief is what still drives everything forward. Because the real power of technology isn't in the machine, it's in the mind that imagines what it can do.